Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I know people are still waiting for coffee, but we can kind of filter in. So, welcome to One Quick Coffee with Infomedia. I'm Carrie. I'm Vice President of Strategic Planning here at Infomedia. And I'm also the host of our podcast, which is One Quick Question. And this is kind of a live event of One Quick Question. So, if you want to find the audio from today, that'll be up live on the podcast. Probably give it a couple weeks, but it'll be there eventually. So Infomedia designs, builds, hosts websites. We also do content for websites. Pretty much anything to do with websites, we can help you with. So if you're already a client, you know that. If you're interested in becoming a client, you can talk to me, talk to Pam after. She's our speaker, or find our contact form online. Yeah. So today we are hearing from Pam Sanderson. She's over there. Yeah. Give her lots of attention and applause. She loves that. Pam is our director of account development, and she does not like when I say this, but she is very much our go-to person for anything, but especially things like what is Google changing now? And so we're excited to have her share that today. So welcome, Pam.
All right. So thank you. All right. Let's see if I do this. Okay. All right. Google's latest updates. Should you pivot your strategy? All right. So what's Google been up to, and why should you care? So Google releases thousands of updates to their algorithm every year. But only some notable ones are announced publicly. And this causes kind of a real problem for people in our industry, because sometimes they'll announce an update and just say, we have applied core updates. Great. What does that mean? They're just announced as core updates. We don't necessarily know exactly what was updated or by how much or how it's going to affect your content. It means that marketing experts, they have to kind of keep their thumb on the algorithm. They have to be watching for adjustments or changes to what Google may or may not have done, or may not have made abundantly clear in their announcement. And so why does this matter? So for instance, Google's organic traffic, or not Google, Infomedia's organic traffic. If I look at it, which is all of our search traffic, it is telling me, okay, you have, this much search traffic coming in every month. If I look and break that down between all the search engines, 98% of it is Google. Google just dominates the industry. Everybody else is just picking up the crumbs, like Bing, and I don't know, there's a bunch of them. So when Google makes a change, not only do we need to listen, but pretty much all their competitors are going to follow suit, because Google sort of sets the trend for everybody. So to make the change for Google, generally you're going to work well for everybody else too. So with all that being said, there have been 11 big announced updates since I gave this talk last year. Now, I could spend all day today, tomorrow, next week. We could be here for a really long time if I try to talk through all of these. So in the interest of everyone's sanity, I'm going to focus on two: September 2023 and March of 2024. So before I get started on those specific updates, why has Google been making so many changes lately to how content is ranked? So again, they make changes all the time, but in the last 2 years, they have been on a whirlwind. And the reason for that, if you ask, which by the way, great question, largely is because of the rise of AI. Now, every single time I say that sentence, the rise of AI, I feel like a character in a Terminator movie. But basically, AI-generated or machine-generated content has changed the game for the web and your search results. So Google typically, before all this, they prioritized quantity of content over quality. So if I have a website and I'm putting out 3 posts a week consistently over time, I'm going to perform better than somebody that put out maybe a better blog post just once a quarter. That is no longer how things work. You also had to write content yourself in the past. You didn't have AI to come in and just magically do it for you. You had to have the time, the money, the interest, the expertise to put out your own content. And if you didn't have that money to have somebody do it for you, you just didn't have updated content on your site. So it really rewarded the people that could put in the time and money to put out content frequently. Now, though, through AI-generated content, you can have content written for free and super quick, like within minutes, and you have fresh content on your website. And that's what generally a lot of people have been doing. So why is this a problem? Or content's a good thing, right? Google feeds off content. The problem is AI-generated content isn't a replacement for well-thought-out, well-researched content on your website. And because it's so easy to create, suddenly the web is inundated with it. Fluff articles that sound okay but don't really say anything are what we're seeing at the top of search results for everything we search for. It's a problem because Google, they don't want that. They don't want a bunch of fluff stuff that nobody cares about. They want what you see to actually serve your needs. And when I say all this, I'm not saying you can't use AI. You can, but think of it as a tool to help you get started with your content, not as a shortcut to avoid writing or editing at all. We actually gave a talk on AI last month. Carrie did it. We put it up on our website. I'm not going to go into all like the when you should use it, when you shouldn't, but I highly recommend listening to that talk, and it'll also be in the show notes of this episode as well. So, how do I make sure that I'm following the Google content guidelines? You need to eat, and I'm not talking about the tacos. EEAT stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. So previously, more than 2 years ago, Google's content guidelines said EAT, E-A-T, and they added the additional E to help combat sort of the rise of this AI-generated content. And the additional E is experience. Now, I did cover EAT in my last talk I gave last year, but I thought it was worth repeating because I'm going to refer to it a bunch of times. So experience is the core differentiator between human and AI written content, because AI cannot have experiences. It's a machine. So when you're talking in your content, you have to say, like, how long have you been in business? What is your differential advantage? What sets you apart from your competition? AI can't have all this stuff. They can't have answers to all that. So, and it's not real answers if they do. So it's something that sets you apart from all this AI generated content. If you're talking about a service, who do you serve? How many customers have you worked with? Do you talk about specific projects, opinions, or thoughts on the subject? Next is experience. So how much expertise does the writer of the content that's writing the content on your website have? And do you share an author bio that talks about their awards, certifications, their education, etc.? So for instance, on Infomedia's blog post, for every single post we put out, we put the author bio, a little picture, a little information about every single person that writes posts. And what this does is it sets them up to be subject matter experts on that topic. So we're saying this wasn't just content written in the void. This wasn't content written by necessarily, it's Infomedia, but not just Infomedia as an entity. We have an actual subject matter expert here at Infomedia that wrote this content. And we talk about that person's education, their experience. Not only are we saying they're a subject matter expert, but we're backing it up with all these details. That's what shows that expertise. Next is authoritativeness. So you have to be a go-to resource for the content you're talking about. And one way of doing that is covering all aspects of that topic. So for instance, if a client asks me to build a website and I can speak to design and development, I'm going to be an authority on that subject. But if I can also speak to the strategy of design, if I can talk about developing the website, if I can show what goes all behind it, like why we make the choices we make, I'm going to be seen more as an authority on that subject. But then if I can do all that, and then I can come in and show case studies, real world examples of how we've applied this information and how we've changed the game for our clients, how we've helped them grow, how we've helped them do things, how we've help them achieve their goals, then I'm going to see as an ultimate authority on that subject. So you can't just say it one place, like, oh, we know what we're talking about. You have to show it in multiple ways on your website, the well-rounded content. Another thing is backlinks from other websites. So do other companies link to your content? Do they see you as an expert in your field? Do other organizations, it doesn't have to be companies, it could be news organizations, it could be trade organizations in town, do they link to you and see you as an authority as well? That can also help. And then you want to build a digital or personal brand as an expert on that topic. So that goes back to creating those subject matter experts. Having those created on your website is also going to have you help you with that authoritativeness. So the last one is trust. And trust is developed when we show all the others together. So experience, expertise, and authoritativeness. Trust is key. Google is selling trust. Google sells a lot of things, but the key thing is trust, because we trust Google to give us the right answer when we search for something. We trust that little magical algorithm to deliver us the results we're looking for. But in order for our listing to show at the top of Google, Google has to trust us, and we have to follow the guidelines they've set for us. Okay, so what are the newest updates? So September of 2023, they announced one of the helpful content updates. And the big changes in it were they loosened the guidelines of AI. So if you were in this talk last year, you heard me talk about Google is not loving AI. And they weren't saying flat out don't use it, but they were saying use it very minimally. But what they've said now is they still prefer content written by humans. However, they've softened their previous statements about it. So previously they had signaled that they prefer content written by people for people. However, in September, they signaled they still prefer content written by people, but the guideline changed to indicate that they want to ensure search results that prioritize original content created for people, but they remove that line about by people. And so they're saying it doesn't necessarily have to be written by humans. Basically, what they're saying is that you can use AI-generated content, but you have to make sure it's original and it follows that EEAT guideline. So basically, instead of you having to write everything, you don't have to be the active writer anymore, but you need to be a very active editor. If you use AI to sort of start the process, you need to be strongly editing that content to make sure that it still shows who you are as a company, what your organization's all about, and you're meeting those EAT metrics. Don't just copy and paste. So another thing Google's doing is they're cracking down on third-party content hosted on subdomains or the main part of the website. We have all seen examples of this, even if you didn't really realize what you were looking at. If you think about a news organization that has a bunch of credit card content that's like sponsored post, they don't write that. They're being paid to post that on their website because that other company gets a little bit of their domain authority. Or they create a subdomain, which is like basically exactly what it sounds. It's like info dot, another domain name. And they put a bunch of sponsored content on there. Not a lot of I don't know a ton of people that do this, but it is something we see. What Google's saying now is if you have that sponsored content that you don't have a heavy hand in curating and writing, that it's better to tell Google to not index it, which you can do within your little settings on the content page, than to have it indexed at all. Because in the past, whereas Google may have turned a blind eye towards it, now they're saying they may actually penalize you for it. So it's going to hurt you, and it doesn't really benefit you in the beginning, like it's your content. So they're saying either don't index it or don't have it at all. The other thing, and this is a really big one, is there's new warnings on attempts to fake updates to pages and faking freshness. So here's what happened. They released updates previous to September that said you need updated content, you needed fresh content. And what they meant was you need to write new content. You need to make sure that you're giving a positive experience to your users. What people heard was, oh, I should just take the content I have and put fresh dates on it. That's not what Google's looking for. So they changed the rules a little bit. They said, make sure your content first is reviewed or written by an expert or enthusiast who demonstrates that they know the topic well. So that's number one. 2, do not just change the dates to make them seem fresh when the content has not been significantly updated. Don't take a blog post from 3 years ago and just change a few sentences and republish it. They know you're doing it and they're going to penalize you for it. And then last, do not simply add a bunch of new content or remove a bunch of content just to appease Google. Unless this is done to benefit the user, unless it's something that actually needs to be done, so maybe you have a ton of content that just doesn't represent your business anymore, your business changed, unless there's a real reason to do it, don't just do it because you're like, well, Google says I need fresh content. If it doesn't actually help your user, Google's like, it's not really going to help you on Google. And so next is the March 24 update. So this one was huge. It was the first big update of 2024, and it was the most complex update that they had launched in a while. And the reason is because it affected multiple core systems and algorithms. And the reason for that is because their goal is to reduce low-quality, unoriginal content in search results by 40%. This is a massive mission, and it has already changed the game and what we're seeing in search results. So what this means is content that may have performed really well for years, a blog post you posted 5 years ago still sending you 1,000 hits a month, content strategies that may have worked in Google that weren't really that well thought out, but maybe they had a couple keywords in there that Google liked and they rewarded you for it. That content's not necessarily going to work for you anymore. older, outdated content that may have worked really well, you're just going to see it completely deprioritized on Google. And so that's kind of shaken things up in our industry like a lot. And the reason is because people who felt like they had cracked the code on Google, that they knew what to do, hey, this is working for me, I don't have to do all these things. Even after the first helpful content update back earlier in 2023, they're like, well, I didn't get affected, I'm fine. Now they're seeing those effects. If you made it through the first couple and you got to March, likely in March, you've seen some big effects to your content. Another thing they did is they released new spam policies that target scaled content abuse, site reputation abuse, and expired domain abuse. Basically, what they're saying is if you have a website with a poor user experience, with pages created only for Google, for search engines, and not for users, or pages created just to match a certain search query, you're going to be deprioritized in search results. That's not to say that you shouldn't think about SEO when you create your content. This is not to say that you shouldn't think about Google and what Google's looking for. What they're saying is if that is all you're thinking about, if you're just trying to crack the Google algorithm and make things perform, it's not going to work for you. It has to be done with a user in mind. The only way they're going to combat all this AI stuff is if your writing and what you're putting out there actually works for real people, not for the Google indexing bots. And so that's why they're adding these things. And specifically for like site reputation abuse, that goes back to making sure that you don't have sponsored content or spammy content that's just kind of feeding off your site reputation. And then expired domain abuse, there's a habit in where a domain expires, somebody snaps it up and they put out a bunch of content trying to feed off like really that previous website. They had a lot of good things happening. They try to go in, snap up the domain, and get what, that traffic basically. So Google's continue to shake things up, but how do you know if you've been affected? So you have to start with your analytics. If you're an Infomedia client, you have analytics. Part of our service is you can work with an account rep like me or with Taylor, who is somewhere in this, there she is, and we will sit down with you. We will say, hey, here's what's happening. Here's how we know you're affected. But if you don't have us, which I hope you do, but if you don't, you can look at your analytics, specifically in GA4, your pages and screens report. And then I would recommend comparing your results over a specific period of time, like 6 months over 6 months or a year over a year. If you see significant drops in organic traffic, if you see significant drops in your conversions on your organic traffic, it's likely you've been affected by the core updates. And specifically, I say the pages and screens report because that will tell you your top pages. And so when you look at that, you'll see like specific blog posts that maybe last year you were getting 2,000 sessions a month and now you're getting 146. That's a real world example. So that's kind of how you'll know, okay, this is likely been affecting my website. So how do you recover if you have been affected? You should prioritize content that meets those EEAT guidelines. So remember, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. Don't rely on AI to write your content without significant editing and adjustment to meet those guidelines. You want to show that you have a well-rounded view of subjects and that you write about your services, products, or industry topics that apply to your business. If you have not pivoted your content, if you've listened to my talks, if you've been in meetings with me where I've said, hey, you need to do this, now is the time to start. This is not something that continue to wait. If you want to perform in Google, you've got to start doing this. Do not create content pages that only serve Google. Make sure that your content serves your user and makes sense within the context of your site. If you're just trying to trick Google or create pages that are only for the bots, that is not going to work anymore. They are saying it's going to be deprioritized, and even if it does work today, it is unlikely it will work in the future because they're going to keep rolling out these updates that attack it. Do not reuse old content without making significant changes to it. Even if you have years of blog posts and pages and you think, oh man, I have all this great content, I'm just going to republish it. It's a super common practice, but it will now get you in trouble with Google. It's okay to reuse old topics, but write new articles to go along with those topics. Or if you do reuse an old article, you need to edit it heavily so that it is actually updated. This is not a change 2 sentences and turn it back into my English teacher situation. Like you really need to get in there and get it, updated. I'd recommend updating old content if it's no longer relevant to your business. Don't do it simply to appease Google. Don't do it just so you can say, oh, it's fresh. Make sure that your updates are true to your business, to your organization, that if you've had changes to your services, if you've had changes to that your team members, that you're updating things that make sense. We do recommend doing a content refresh. So that's actually a service that Infomedia offers. You can do it yourself, but sometimes it's helpful to have help. And what that is where we go through and we look at your entire sitemap, we look at all your content, and we say, okay, here's the content that really needs to be updated. And it's not just updating the words on the page. Sometimes it's breaking out that content so it's more easily, read. Sometimes it's updating the media on the page. It just depends on kind of what needs to happen. But we do it with SEO in mind, but it's not done just only to serve SEO. And next, pay attention to the user experience of your website and your pages. Y'all have said a user experience like 500 times up here, but it is so important. So avoid walls of text. If your site looks like a 5th grade English paper and just like text and paragraph, you have done something wrong. It needs to be easily scannable and digestible. Add bullets, add block quotes, add images, videos, dynamic content, embedded content. Break it up. Make it look visually interesting. This has to be something that a real human would want to look at and read. If you mention services in your post, link to them. If you say contact us in the last paragraph, link to that. Cross-linking to other pages on your site is very helpful and can not only help your user find what they're looking for, but when Google does crawl the site, Google will see how content relates to each other. Another way of doing that is if I'm talking about a subject in a page or a post and I maybe mention something I talked about in a previous post, link to that too. It doesn't just have to be to service pages or action pages. Link to previous content you put out. Again, that's going to help Google see that well-rounded view we were talking about early on in the talk. And then make sure your content is easily found on your website. And what I mean by that is when they go to your website, don't hide things. Don't go crazy with widgets and plugins to add pop-ups and fly-ins and I don't know, I see all kinds of stuff. You want to make sure that your navigation is clean and organized. You want to make sure that your content is easy to find but also accessible. So what I mean by that is even if I can't visually perceive something, if I'm using a screen reader or some sort of accessibility mechanism, I still need to be able to see your content. So don't hide gray text on a white background. Don't put a bunch of text into an image. It should still be indexable by Google, so don't just build it in as part of the image. Don't put a bunch of text over a really hectic background that has a lot of colors, a lot of things going on. Don't adopt a more and more attitude with all the features that you add in. Your content should be easy to find. Your users should not have to jump through a bunch of hoops to access it. And then last, if you have seen a major drop in your organic traffic and you're not seeing that recovery happen, it is probably wise to invest in some search engine optimization. Whether you work with Infomedia or not, a marketing company is going to be able to create an action plan to help you increase your click-through rates, conversions, and search rankings. They can help you plan a content refresh, help you follow Google's best practices so that you can perform. They're going to make sure that whatever you're doing, that you're getting the value for that content that you're putting out and that you're going to see some improvement in your organic traffic. If you're interested in learning more, Infomedia does not do SEO. That's our sister company, Uptick, but a few of them are here, so if you can get with me, I can introduce you to them. But I highly recommend if you are seeing big drops and you're not seeing a recovery, you might want to think about that service. And then final thoughts. So do not try and trick Google. Even if the trick works today, they're going to continue pushing these updates. It will not work long term. You will see articles all over the web saying, oh, you don't have to do this. Just do this little shortcut. Or, yeah, you can use AI. Just change this little sentence here or just rewrite it this way. It doesn't matter. Prioritize what your user needs. Prioritize what makes sense for the people that you want to come to your website, and that's how you're going to be successful with Google. If you try to chase every little update and, hey, I'm going to just trick it here, I'm going to do this, it's not going to work for you long term. Don't try and take shortcuts. Make sure that when you do use AI, that you're not just using it as a replacement for any content that a human would write. If you do use it, heavily edit it. Make sure that it still meets the EAT guidelines and that you're thinking through, does this actually sound like someone from my business would write? Does this have our voice to it? Does it make sense for the other content that we put out? Make sure that this makes sense in your overall strategy. And so then, if you do all that, ideally you should be successful with Google and survive these future core updates.
So I did want to tell you about next month's topic. We're going to be talking about Instagram Reels. We did pivot a little bit. We were going to talk about something else. You guys did not seem to be interested because no one signed up. So we are going to be talking about Instagram Reels. I'm going to be presenting with Taylor and Elena. So you know Elena from our Canva workshop, and Taylor, this will be her first time presenting. But what we're going to do is kind of take it from the perspective of a small business owner, or if you're kind of like a freelancer or something like that. So you probably don't have time to say, like, what's the most, what's trending right now? Let me film an entire reel on what's trending, because we already have businesses to run. And other things to do. So what we're going to do is kind of we're calling them like recipes, like 3 kind of recipes that you can say, like, okay, well, I can do this over and over, I can do this over and over. So that's what we're trying to do. If you're saying, like, I'm really struggling to get content here, we're going to kind of take that from a beginner's perspective, because as we all know, those perform better than other things, but they're kind of hard to put together. So we are at various skill levels. I'm like old and not that good at it. Taylor's actually a videographer on the side, so we're all different skill levels. So I think that'll be fun. That's next month. You can already sign up for that if you want. Same deal, tacos, coffee. It's going to be free. And then until then, you can find us on our podcast. We have One Quick Question and also The Localist, where we profile local businesses every week. So thanks for coming. See you next month, hopefully.